And let me start, just like you, with a bit of encouragement, because I think what's happening around us, the global policy environment is actually quite conducive for our joint ambition. And I think most of us who have been working in the food and nutrition security sector for years know that 10 years ago it wasn't like that. We've actually seen that a window was opening of attention, of maybe also a differentiated view of what's happening with the close to 800 million people who are suffering from hunger and malnutrition. And of course, we all know that last year was one of those very special years with the SDGs, and not just the SDGs, the second international conference on nutrition, and more so, of course, the climate change agreement that was held in Paris. And this week, as I think all of us have realized, we have passed the threshold of more than 70 countries, I think, who've ratified the agreement, representing more than 55% of climate emissions. So actually, this is now happening. This is in place less than a year after a big treaty has been signed, and that is so encouraging, and should encourage all of us in our ambition to now put all these agreements into action, because that's what's required now. This is required in terms of national action plan. This is required in terms of ambitions like the one that IFPRI has formulated, getting rid of hunger in less than 15 years, in less than the time that the SDGs have spoken about, and now what is required. The questions that we've been asked to deal with as panelists, found them quite appropriate, in terms of what policies are needed and what systems are needed, because these are appropriate questions for the simple fact that the policies and the systems that have been in place so far are not good enough. Otherwise, we wouldn't have to have those big ambitions and treaties last year, right? So there need to be some changes. And the perspectives that we can give from the NGO side, I'm quite glad actually to be in a company of two other NGO colleagues. You've been very courageous to bring 3 NGO representatives on the panel, is from the care side as follows. We work in agricultural systems that we call super. And super is not just a quality of something good, but it's also an acronym. And I think that's an acronym that is maybe applicable for policies and the larger food and agricultural system. And the super stands for, the S and U is sustainable. Of course, these are systems, and let me get those right, that have not just ecological sustainability, but a social sustainability as well, in the way that they encourage and ensure social inclusion. And the IFPRI president was referring to that in his keynote speech. Social inclusion is one of the preconditions for a system to last and to work for the benefit of the poor. The P stands for productive and profitable. And this is not just about productivity of yields. This is about agricultural systems that ensure the equal access to the resources that are required, and systems that empower small-scale food producers to access and participate not just in production, but also in markets where the value is actually created. The E stands for equitable. So again, gender inequality is something that must end. We know that, and that's not just happening for moral reasons. We must redress the inequality that women have faced so long, but we also need to utilize the potential that is out there, particularly in the area of agriculture and nutrition, taking care of the needs of the family, and the kids that suffer from stunting, which will of course affect the rest of the life. And then the R stands for resilient, and these are not just resilience of communities, but for policies that protect and promote the rights and the interests of small-scale food producers. And that is in systems, in market and political systems, which respond to their needs and meet their priorities. We've been asked to provide some concrete demands, if you wish, for policy changes. And around the three areas, nutrition, agriculture, and climate, for nutrition, definitely there's a scaled-up investment required. We talked this morning about how comprehensive partnerships are needed, because nutrition is not just to be addressed through nutrition-specific interventions, but through much more holistic and comprehensive approaches that include health, water and sanitation, and the like. And of course, those investments around nutrition must target those populations who are most in need. And if you look at some of the reports and the images that we get from the man-made crisis, from the Yemens of this world, and you've mentioned that, hunger and serious malnutrition is happening in places like Yemen, like Syria, which are almost impossible to access. And that's what we mean by leaving no one behind, actually focusing on those who are mostly affected. In terms of agriculture, let's just continuously remind each other this is not just about food production and yields. Agriculture is a livelihood, it's a source of nourishment, and it is something that is characterized by inequalities in the system and lack of access to productive resources, particularly by the most marginalized. And lastly, the climate change. If we have this opportunity right now, let's push to ramp up the investment and the ambition. Let's push for the fact that it's not just 2 degrees, it's probably less that is required, 1.5. It's been, we all actually mentioned that ambition. And last but not least, let's also push for the fact that we need much more investment in adaptation capacity of the poorest of the poor. Only 20% of the global climate funding is going actually into the ability to adapt to climate change and its effects. So I think we deserve, actually not we, but those who are affected deserve this kind of commitments, the policy change, and what is required to ensure everybody's right to food and food security. Thank you.